You know, there's one scene that immediately stands out when we talk about Lee Kuan Yew. Imagine this, August 9, 1965. The nation's leader goes live on air to announce independence. But instead of triumph, he weeps. He literally cries before the cameras, unable to speak. That man was Lee Kuan Yew, and the country was Singapore. This is perhaps the only state in history that did not fight for its independence. It was forced to be independent. They were literally kicked out of the Federation of Malaysia. This moment, this despair, is the key to everything. Singapore was not a country, it was a problem. It was a tiny island with zero natural resources. They had no army, no industry, and they didn't even have their own drinking water. It was imported from the very country that had just expelled them. Contemporary articles were brutal, calling it a cesspool of misery and degradation. The main question arises. How did this hopeless imperial leftover become one of the wealthiest nations in the world in just one generation? Lee Kuan Yew was not a typical Asian leader. He was the descendant of Chinese immigrants, a brilliant law graduate from Cambridge. He began his career defending the rights of trade unions. But upon returning to the chaos of post-war Singapore, his political project collapsed in 1965. He realized ordinary methods wouldn't work. Out of despair, his philosophy was born: discipline is more important than democracy. Freedom, he believed, was a luxury that would only lead to chaos and collapse for a nation on the brink. His first enemy was internal: corruption, which was rampant, part of the old colonial system. His approach was pragmatically brilliant: the carrot and the stick. The stick: he gave the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau almost unlimited powers. They could check the accounts of any official and their relatives. The laws were draconian. The carrot: he raised the salaries of civil servants, judges, and ministers to the level of top private sector executives. He reasoned like a businessman, not a moralist. He said, if we don't pay these people well, someone else will pay them. His approach was ruthlessly consistent. He famously said, to combat corruption, start by locking up 3 of your friends. You know why, and they know why. This wasn't just a quote. There are cases, even involving his close associates, who were exposed for bribery. Lee did not let the matter slide. His associate committed suicide. This was a personal tragedy for Lee, but he showed the entire country, no one is untouchable. With internal order established, he needed investment. He looked not to regional neighbors like Indonesia or Thailand, but to Israel as a model, a small state surrounded by larger, often hostile neighbors, forced to survive on intellect and organization. His strategy was to leapfrog the region by selling what no one else had: perfect order, absolute security, the rule of law, and zero bureaucracy. This pragmatic control extended to society. The most famous example is the ban on chewing gum. Initially, he was against it, but the problem became national. Vandals were sticking gum everywhere, even on the sensors of the newly built, National Pride, the $5 billion subway system. Doors wouldn't close, and the whole line stalled. Lee realized the behavior of a few individuals was undermining a multi-billion-dollar system. In 1992, the ban was enacted. To him, the chewing gum was a threat to the ideal order. This order was bought at the price of political freedom. As the country grew richer, political freedoms shrank. Opponents were jailed for long periods without trial. The press was tightly controlled. Lee openly stated, the freedom of the press must be subordinated to the paramount needs of the integrity of Singapore. To him, any criticism was a direct threat to the nation's survival. The most striking example of his engineering mindset was applied to family and marriage. He famously advised, if a man with a higher education does not want to marry a woman with a higher education, I can tell him he's a fool. He believed that if you marry a woman without a higher education, some children will be smart, others will not be. He saw educated Singaporean women not marrying as a loss of good genes, and a state problem that needed to be solved through special tax breaks for educated women who had more than 2 children. Regardless of the controversial methods, the numbers speak for themselves. From 1960 to 1980, the GDP per capita increased 15-fold. He transformed a swampy port into a global financial center in 1 generation. The paradox: on one side, economic miracle, safety, high living standards. On the other, the cost paid in the suppression of individual freedoms and absolute control. Lee saw his country not as a nation, but as a highly efficient corporation providing global services, logistics, finance, security. His legacy poses the eternal dilemma: is sacrificing some individual freedom an acceptable price for security, order, and phenomenal economic development? Today, as the world faces crises and instability, the Lee Kuan Yew model, where efficiency and order are placed above individual liberties, becomes uncomfortably relevant. Was the price of this success, expressed in the suppression of personality, simply too high?